Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video 4, Setting Up an Internet Gateway for Exchange 2003. Now in this video we're going to take a look at how to get this internet gateway up and running so we can start sending email in and out of our network. Okay, so this is one of the most critical videos in this whole course because without this, email is just not going to be working how we expect it to. There's going to be several things that we cover throughout this video, starting with the requirements to send email. Okay, so that'll be the first thing that we look at here in just a second. After we finish this up, we're going to take a look at how to install our NAT server. So we're going to go through step by step, install the NAT server, get that piece up and functioning so we can connect out to the internet, and then we're going to set up services and ports on this NAT server to forward email into our Exchange server as well. From there, we're going to go into registering a domain name, which is a definite requirement if you want to set up email for your company. You're going to have your own unique domain name out there on the internet. Once we've done that, one of the missing components I find that a lot of students don't get when it comes to email is configuring DNS. So we're going to take some time. We're actually going to go out to GoDaddy and we're going to take total DNS control over there and we're going to show you how to set up MX records. Okay, so MX records are mail exchanger records, and these are required if you want email to end up being mapped back to your company's Exchange server. After we finish that up, we're going to work on recipient policies, and these are necessary to change our current domain name. Remember, right now we have sophystoybox.local set up for our Active Directory domain, and that's just not going to work over the internet when it comes time to sending emails to these users. So what we can do with our recipient policy is specify additional email domains that we want to associate with each one of our user accounts. Okay, so we can add sophystoybox.com or sophystoybox.net just by setting this up and configuring a recipient policy. We're then going to finish up with a couple more things. We're going to spend some time on SMTP properties, talking about what's important, how to set up that virtual server, and which settings to leave alone. We'll finalize this whole video by looking at a Linksys router and showing you how it's different than a NAT server or a traditional firewall, and show you how to set up port forwarding so if this is your type of environment, you'll understand how to get your Exchange server set up and working even with this Linksys router as well. Okay, let's get started, and what we'll look at first are the additional requirements if you want email to work. Okay, so this is taken directly from the lab book. If you are setting this up on your own, you would require that you have all of these components, and we also put them in here because I want to make sure that you're comfortable with what you need outside of Exchange server if you want it to work. First off, we need a broadband internet access, whether it's a T1 line, DSL, cable modem, whatever you have, we need to have some sort of broadband internet access. A modem's just not going to cut it when it comes to trying to run Exchange server. From there, we need to get a public IP address from our ISP, which really should be no sweat whatsoever because if you're connected out to the internet, you're going to have a public IP address. Now, we prefer a static IP address, and this is typically what you're going to get if you're subscribing to a business class type of service like a T1 or even business DSL. Dynamic IP addresses, a lot of times you'll get with home accounts or cheaper accounts. Cable modems, some DSL service is going to provide you with a dynamic IP address. Now both of these will work. The downside of the dynamic IP address is your IP address is going to change from time to time, which will cause you to have to switch your configuration up as well. So if you have the option, I would highly recommend that you get static IP addresses for your particular setup. Last thing we need is a registered domain name, okay? And I recommend GoDaddy.com. They've got great customer service, a management tool where you can manage your own settings, and it's also cheap. You're talking about $8 or $9 for a domain name. You could also get them from Network Solutions or Register.com, amongst several other companies too. Now we have to have this domain name, and that's what we're going to be using for Sophie's Toy Box. They have their own unique internet domain name that they've registered online, sophystoybox.com. Okay, and if you want to send email over the internet, this is a requirement. Your company must have its own dedicated, unique domain name. Okay, we're ready to get started. So let's take a look at our network diagram here, and this is of our physical network that we're going to be working with in this particular exercise. Now we have these three computers we've been working with all along. Here we have Exchange 1, which is our domain controller and Exchange server, and then XP1. And these are the two computers we've been working with predominantly so far in these videos. Now in this video we're going to add to the mix NAT1. And early in this lab we configured NAT1 with this information up here. but we left these settings down here. We left these basically blank. Okay, so we're going to come back to these right now, fill these in, and get this NAT server up and running and configured on our network. Okay, let's go ahead and do that then. We're going to connect over to NAT1 as a starting point. So we're forming a remote desktop connection over to NAT1. Okay, and here you see we're sitting on the desktop, and what we have here, just to differentiate, is a black desktop background, and NAT1 is labeled up top here. Okay, let's go first check out our IP address information. This is going to be the first thing that we need to worry about. Okay, so we see that My Network Places is not available, so let's go put this onto our desktop here real quick. Oops, My Network Places, and I'm going to also add network connections. Okay, so let's go take a look at our IP addresses then. You see we have a LAN card which is enabled. Okay, and it's currently configured with the .254 IP address, same subnet mask as our other clients. No default gateway should be configured. It's real important that you leave this setting blank, and your preferred DNS server has got to be pointing inbound to Exchange 1. Okay, this is where our domain controller / DNS server is running, and it's real important here. A lot of people will put their ISP's DNS server here, and it's not the correct setting. We want to have this NAT server pointing internally inside the domain. Okay, so we get this setting set up. Next, we're going to be working on our WAN connection, and you can see right now it's currently disabled. I'm going to go ahead and go to the properties first and take a look at what we have set here. Okay, right now we have nothing, so what I'm going to have to do is take the ISP assigned public IP address that we received and assign that here on the WAN card. Okay, so we're working with 69.128.98.220. Okay, and the subnet mask is 255.255.255.248. These settings really aren't important to you. They're unique to our particular network. They're not going to work for you. Okay, and I'm not making these up. These settings are provided from the ISP directly. Okay, so you'll be literally reading this off of a piece of paper. Okay, your DNS settings, you should really leave these blank, okay? Because your internal network card is going to be pointing to the local DNS. It's going to take care of all of your DNS name resolution. So I'm going to leave these settings blank, click OK here, click OK once again, and now we're going to enable this card. Okay, so once this card's enabled, you'll see that we have a LAN connection and a WAN connection, okay, and we're all set and ready to go. Now, one thing to point out, a lot of people go, well, I've got this public IP address here on my WAN connection, so I should be able to test this, go out to the internet right now, and see if my internet connection actually is live. Under normal circumstances, that would be correct and true, but keep in mind that this DNS setting that we just configured, we didn't configure one. Okay, so there's no DNS server pointing out to the internet. On the LAN side, we're pointing inbound, okay, to Exchange 1 for our DNS resolution. So what ends up happening when you try going out to a website, you go to Exchange 1, your domain controller / DNS server, for DNS name resolution. Then what happens from there, it tries to go outbound over the internet, but the NAT server is not configured, so these DNS name resolutions will not pass. Okay, so no internet access, whether you're internally on a client computer or directly on this NAT server. Okay, so let's go ahead and close this out, and now what we'll do is set up our NAT server. Okay, so to do this, we just need to go to All Programs, Administrative Tools, and then Routing and Remote Access. Okay, and you can see currently this is disabled, so to set this up, we just need to right-click on NAT1 and go to Configure and Enable Routing and Remote Access. Now when I select this, it's going to take us through a wizard here, so we just click Next past the first screen, and you see right here we've got a couple choices that relate to NAT. One is just plain old network address translation, and the second one is a VPN and NAT. Now this is great because in Windows 2000 we didn't have both of these choices, so if you wanted VPN/NAT, you had to do this manually, and the configuration was quite difficult. There's a lot of packet filters and things you had to change in order to allow that VPN access inbound into your network. For right now, we're going to configure just NAT. In a later video, we'll explore using this VPN access and NAT, but for right now, we're going to select NAT, click Next, okay, and then here on our NAT internet connection, we need to specify which interface is publicly connected to the internet. Okay, and we've got two ways of guessing. One, We name this one wide area network, so that's real simple for us. And then 2, you can look at the IP address and tell which one's connected out to the internet. All right, next, down here below, we see that we have the ability to enable a basic firewall. I do recommend that you check this box, leave it checked. This will at least provide you some sort of protection from the internet. Now keep in mind the NAT server is a basic firewall. It's going to give you basic packet filtering and very little else. So if you're in a larger environment and your budget will afford you a better firewall, I definitely recommend that you invest in a product like ISA Server 2000 or 2004, or even a hardware appliance. You can get those relatively cheap out there. They'll afford you much better protection than the NAT server will right here. Okay, so leave these settings, click Next. Click Finish, and just like that, we're all set. So pretty simple configuration on our NAT server. Once this is up and running, what we'll do is do a couple things. We're going to check and see if we can actually connect to the internet from the NAT server as well as from our XP machine. Okay, so here we're sitting in the NAT server. Looks like everything is good here. So let's go ahead and close this. Let's see if we can connect to the internet here right now. We'll just try MSN as far as our website is concerned. Okay, and we do have access here right now. Okay, all these are coming up, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, just because of the security within Server 2003. Until you disable this, you're going to get a lot of these content blocking messages. So no big deal, because we're not going to be using this machine going forward for Internet Explorer, but just so you're aware of what it actually is. Okay, so no problem here. Now let's connect back over to our XP machine. And what we'll do is go over to XP1. We'll log on here and just want to see if logged on as a different user. So let's just log on as that user just for our test. Okay, Ray Moray is logged on here. So we're going to close Outlook. And we just want to see if we can access the internet from a client computer. Okay, looks like we have no problem whatsoever here, so that's a good sign. Our NAT server is up and working, and we definitely want to check this out before we continue too much further forward. Okay, so we'll minimize here, and now I'm going to connect back over to my NAT server. I want to point out a couple more things. Okay, you've got a live server connected to the internet with a public IP address, so it's critically important that you secure this machine. Now there's a whole array of things you can do, and that's something that's covered in our security videos as well as on the internet if you're looking for some more security fixes for this machine. Some basic things you must do: you got to go out to the Windows Update site, get your latest hot fixes, service packs, get all those installed right away, because this machine is definitely vulnerable. Another thing you want to do: go into your local administrator account. You can just right click My Computer, go to Manage Local Users and Groups, reset this administrator account. Okay, we really don't want this set up this way. This is real easy to hack into. So let's change this to we'll just use the same one I'm using on my domain administrator account. Okay, so this is much more difficult for a hacker to try to guess, and make sure that you have a password set here locally as well. So I'm going to go ahead and set this password here. I do recommend as secure and long as possible. Okay, so even though this is a test lab environment, I'm pretty serious about setting this right now, because this machine that I have is connected to my internal network. So if I leave this machine out there, low-lying fruit for other people to jump onto, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for them to get into my internal network where I really don't want them to be accessing. Okay, so I've taken care of that. That's just the start. There's all sorts of other security fixes you can do to really lock down this machine, but just to give you a feel as a starting point. Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I do want to check. Let's see if we can send an email, okay, out to an external email address. At this point right now, you should be able to send an email out to an external account. So I'm going to go ahead and send one out to my personal email account here. Okay, let's see if this actually works here. I'm going to click send. Let's put test in here. Okay, and we'll give it a second and see if it bounces back. But what should happen, it should get out there and should be no problem, because at this point right now, this machine and the default settings that are set up within Exchange Server will route this email over the internet, and it should arrive at its destination. Now, if that person tries to send a reply back to me, however, it's not going to work. Okay, and the reason is because first off, our domain is not set up, and then secondly, there's a couple settings on NAT that we need to take care of before this email is going to make it locally inside the network. Let's go take a look at those settings on the NAT server while we're waiting to see if this email bounces back. So we're going to form that remote desktop connection back over to the NAT server once again, and we're just going to open up routing and remote access and then drill down inside of NAT. Okay, and where we need to go is within NAT, then IP routing, and then to the NAT basic firewall. Okay, over here when we look at these interfaces, you want to choose the WAN interface, right click that, and then go to properties. Okay, now from here we're going to go over to the services and ports tab. Okay, and this tells you right here pretty much what it's for. Select the services on your network to which you want to provide access for internet users. This will create exceptions in your firewall. So exceptions meaning we really don't want to enable a lot of these because it's just going to open up more and more holes in our firewall. Okay, so that's not a good thing. However, we do want to enable SMTP. We're going to pass email, and what's going to happen when an email is sent from an outside user, it should be directed to the NAT server. The NAT server is going to look at that email and basically determine that it's been sent on port 25, which is the default port for SMTP. When this email server then, or when this NAT server receives this email, what we're going to do is then configure it and tell it where to forward this email to. And that's what we're doing right here with this private address. Okay, so this is the address of Exchange 1, our Exchange server. Okay, and you see all these other settings are done for us. It's the SMTP service. It's on this interface, TCP protocol, incoming port 25, outgoing port 25. Just so you're familiar with what these settings actually mean, this protocol is the transport protocol, and this is the default transport protocol that's used by SMTP. So you would always be using TCP. Your port number, that's up to you as far as what port number you want to use, but you'd be a fool to use anything but port 25. And that's because by default, emails are sent using port 25. Okay, so we're going to be listening on port 25. So this NAT server, anything basically that comes to the NAT server on port 25, it's going to pick up and then it's going to send out to this IP address, and it's going to use this port number as well. Okay, and then your Exchange server, since we're using this port number 25, has got to be listening on port 25 as well. Now all of these are the defaults. There's really nothing you need to do. You don't need to change this. The only time you would have to change this is if for some reason you wanted to use a different port number on your Exchange server, which is highly unlikely. Okay, so let's click OK here. The next thing we need to do is make sure that you select this checkbox. For whatever reason, when you configure it, they don't select it automatically for you. So you have to check that checkbox, and then down here below, you need to make sure that you click OK. Okay, so that's it. We've now got our NAT server set up. Any email that's directed internally, okay, to this public IP address is actually going to be forwarded into the Exchange server, and then the Exchange server is going to have to make a decision on what to do with it. Let's go take a look at a diagram. Okay, this basically is Sophie's Toy Box Company right now, and this machine here is our NAT server. Okay, it's marked as firewall. Yeah, it is providing firewall services, but for us right now, it's acting as a NAT server. When an email, this will be a bad email drawing, but close enough, right? Okay, when an email comes in, it's presented to the NAT server right here. Okay, the NAT server is going to look at it, and it's going to determine that it is an email. It was directed to this public IP address on our NAT server to port 25. So the NAT server then is going to forward this automatically into our Exchange 2003 machine. The Exchange 2003 machine then needs to make a decision, and that basically is, does this email belong to our company? And what I mean by that is, well, if this email is addressed to bob@aol.com, well, we're not resolving domains, email domains for AOL.com. So what's going to happen is this server is just going to drop that email and say, hey, can't help you, and that email is going to die right there. Okay? If the email is addressed to, let's say, bob@sophies.toybox.com, which is the domain name we're going to be using here in a second, Well, the Exchange server is going to accept the email, then it's going to consult its actual mailbox list and see if there's a Bob within the Exchange organization. If there is a Bob, it's going to go ahead and deliver that message to the mailbox. If there's not a Bob, well, then it's going to return a non-delivery report back to the original user, letting them know that that user does not exist. Okay, so this NAT server basically is the middleman forwarding email into the Exchange server. When the Exchange server is ready to send an email out, it just forwards it through the email without any special ports or services needing to be configured. Okay, next thing we're going to do is connect out to the internet and register our domain name. Okay, so we're going to use GoDaddy as I mentioned before. So I'm connecting out to the internet, just going out to GoDaddy's website. Okay, and this is a simple process. You've probably been through this before, but if you're looking for a domain name, just a matter of going to a website, popping in the domain name here to check to see if that domain name is actually available. So if you're looking for trainsignal.com, for example, just click search. Okay, and then it's going to tell you right here that that particular name is taken. They got a service where you can back order it. Just basically, as soon as it expires, they'll try to grab that name. You know, of course, if somebody keeps renewing it, you're never going to have that name available to you. Okay, so you need to keep working here until you find a domain name that works for your company. Okay, and in our case, Sophie's Toy Box. Okay, this is what we did originally. Click search. That domain name was available, and we checked out and basically purchased it for $8.95 a year. Okay, so real cheap at GoDaddy. Okay, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to pause this video, and I'm going to go ahead and log on here so we can take a look at my domain account, and we're going to work with that sophistoybox.com domain name, setting it up with DNS. I'm also going to take a look and see if that email went through. We never got a bounce back here, so we'll see if that email went through that we sent out before. Okay, we've logged on here to GoDaddy, and we can take a look now. This is in the Manage Domain section, and we're taking a look at just the different domains that are registered right now to TrainSignal. So in some of these you'll recognize from previous labs that we've had, benandbrady.com, Green Lizard Books. Here we have sophistoybox.com, the one we're working with for this particular lab. Okay, so if I select this here on the left-hand side, that then pulls up information that's specific to this particular account on the right-hand side. Okay, and this is what we're going to work with right now. We're going to come over here to Total DNS Control. Okay, so when I click this plus by Total DNS Control, I have the ability to manage subdomains or to take total DNS control of the MX records as well. Okay, now a couple things we should note here. If you're going to be hosting your own DNS, let's say that you want to have your own DNS server, so people are pointing to your internal DNS servers, and then you're going to route them to MX records. You can do that, but you don't do it through this total DNS control. What you need to do is go down here to the domain host summary. Okay, and then this, when you click, I don't want to mess this up because my DNS is already configured. Okay, but you'll be configuring domain host summary as well as name server summary. Okay, and these two settings together then will work to point to your DNS servers that are locally on your network. Okay, we're going to let GoDaddy host our DNS servers, and we're just going to enter in MX records that'll point to our locally hosted mail servers. Okay, so to do this, I need to select Total DNS Control and MX records. Okay, so I select this, and it's going to bring up a pop-up window here. It's blocked by default, but we'll just always allow pop-ups from this site. Okay, and in a second here you'll see this. Make sure that you're managing the right domain as well. It's happened to me before. The interface can be confusing, but we are working with sophistoybox.com. This is the correct domain, the one that we want to be working with. Okay, now what our goal is basically is to come down here and try to make sense out of all of this mess. Okay, and we're going to be working mostly right now with our host records as well as our MX or mail exchanger records. Okay, so if we take a look here, firstly, looking up top here, we see that we currently have an SMTP record, and this was already added in by myself. Okay, and the reason we've done this ahead of time, well, it takes 24 to 48 hours, and oftentimes more than that, for your DNS settings to propagate. Okay, so I've already pre-configured these, but I will show you exactly how these were configured. Okay, one of the first things we'll do is really decide upon the host name to use on the internet for your Exchange server. Okay, and it doesn't really matter what you use. I just chose to use SMTP. You could use mail, M-A-I-L. Any name is fine, really. Okay, but obviously if it has some sort of significance to email, probably going to be better. Okay, so I used SMTP here, and what I basically did was just clicked Add New A Record. Okay, an A record is the same thing as a host record. Okay, so to do this, we have to enter in a host name, enter points to IP address, and then a TTL value. Okay, and it's got real good interface here to help you out when you're setting this up. Okay, but the host name, you can click on one of these question marks if you need help, but this is where you're actually going to enter in the single host name. So let's say that I was entering in a new host name. I'll just create a new one here. Let's create one for mail. Okay, M-A-I-L, like we said before. To be more specific, let me make it SMTP mail. I want to make sure that there's not another entry that's M-A-I-L that this would conflict with. Okay, now what you have to do is basically say, where does this host record point to? And this is going to be the IP address, our public IP address that we're using. Okay, and this is the one the NAT server currently has. Remember mine offhand, I believe, yes, 69.128.98.220. Okay, and then thirdly, we have a time to live value. Here it gives it to us in hours, days, or a week. This will calculate this time to live value in seconds, though, when you look at it a little bit later on. Okay, time to live value is basically it's asking how long should we wait before we go consult a different DNS server. Okay, how long should we wait before we go to the next choice? Okay, so we don't really have a lot of choices here. The default is great. We're just going to leave this at 1 hour, and I'm going to click Continue. Okay, it's going to go ahead and bring up these entries, and now it wants to know if this is good or you want to add these. So let's go ahead and add this. And it blocked our pop-up. Let's go ahead and try this one more time. Okay, and it tells us right here the A record was added successfully. Please allow 24 to 48 hours for it to propagate. Okay, and if we look here, you see that we have another A record set up. It's not going to conflict with this other one because you can have as many different records as you want pointing to the same IP address. Okay, so this is just a name. Remember what DNS is. This is all about name resolution down to IP addresses. So now we have the ability to use SMTP or smtpmail.sophystoybox.com, and that's going to resolve down to an IP address, making it simpler for us when it comes time to let's say use Outlook web access or access some other piece remotely. Okay, or website. You know, we're not setting up a website in this case, but that's, you know, exactly how it would be used. Okay, next thing we need to worry about is our MX record. Okay, and our MX record, this is our mail exchanger record, and this is going to tell any email that comes to sophystoybox.com where it should go. Okay, more specifically, remember an email is sent out over the internet, and a DNS name for sophystoybox.com is obtained. So what ends up happening when you send an email to joe@sophystoybox.com, because there's that @ sign in it and it's an email, DNS knows that this is a mail, basically a piece of email, and what it's going to do once it reaches that DNS server that's authoritative for sophystoybox.com, it's going to go consult its MX records. Okay, and in this particular DNS setup, there is only one MX record. I'll show you how to add a second one here in a second. But to add this, what you basically do is just click Add New MX Record. It's real simple. And then you need to set a priority value. Okay, the lower the priority value, the more priority it has. So I already have one set at 0. I'm going to set another one at 20. Okay, and this has nothing to do with seconds or hours or anything else, just basically which number is bigger or smaller than the other one. And since the first one that we have is 0 and this one is 20, the record that I already have entered is going to be the one with the higher priority. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 20 here, so it has a lower priority because I do not want it to take over responsibility. The host name. Now this you can either leave at the @ sign, as you see right here, or you can enter in your domain name or another domain name. But what this is going to do is just default to sophystoybox.com. Okay, just sophystoybox.com, which is great. Then we need to put in an enter goes to address, and this isn't an IP address, but rather it's going to be one of the records, one of your host records. Okay, so if we look back, we can't see it. What you have to do though is basically just type in one of the host records we already have, and we already have an SMTP, so I would just enter in SMTP here. So I don't have a duplicate setting though. I'm going to use SMTP mail. Okay, and continue. Okay, and once we add this record, and I'll give you a better feel for it once we see it on the interface. Okay. All right, so we go down here to the bottom. Okay, and oops, forgot to add in the latter part of this, but what we want to do, this is just now going to send this off to SMTP mail. We want this to go to smtpmail.sophystoybox.com. Okay, and that's just the records up here, the A records that we've already configured. Okay, so that email comes in to joe@sophystoybox.com. We consult our MX records. These MX records, we go down, we see that this one has the lowest priority. Okay, and it then looks at this and goes, okay, to get the IP address, we have to go consult our A record, the A record smtp.sophystoybox.com. Going up here, we look and we see that this A record is smtp.sophystoybox.com because this DNS forward lookup zone is actually set up for sophystoybox.com. Okay, and eventually that Exchange server is going to get this IP address, and the email is then going to be sent off to 69128.98.220. Okay, and that's how the whole process works. Okay, we'll worry about CNAMEs when we get into the next section, next video, but for right now, that's what we need to do within this DNS configuration. Okay, as a review, number one, create your A record. Okay, your A record is just going to be a name associated to an IP address. So I came up with any name. Since we're working with email, I'm using SMTP, and it's pointing to the one public IP address I have that's on the public interface of the NAT server. Second, we have to set up our MX record. The MX record, the lower the priority, the better, meaning the higher priority it has. Lower number, higher priority. Okay, this @ symbol here is just indicating the actual domain name. So instead of typing out sophystoybox.com, that's what this is representative of. Okay, so what's going to end up happening, we're going to go consult this SMTP record. Okay, oops, didn't go up high enough. Consult this SMTP record from up above. All right, so smtp.sophystoybox.com. We'll pull this IP address, so then all email is now going to be sent down to 69128.98.220 as well. Okay, so that's all there is to it on the DNS side, and it's a little bit confusing at first. I do recommend, read the tutorials, go through, read these question marks. They'll help to explain a lot about DNS and also how this particular interface works, because different websites have different interfaces, and I know Network Solutions can definitely be confusing, and some registrars actually don't even offer a web-based tool like this at all. You'll have to call them and trust them to creating all your DNS settings. Scary there. Okay, so we're all set here. Let's go back over to OneNote and take a look at what we're going to be going over next. Okay, and we're right now on the alternate email address recipient policies. Now, recipient policies are set within the Exchange System Manager, and they're used to actually add additional email addresses. Right now, because we set up the domain as sophystoybox.local, all of our user accounts have email addresses just like that. Okay, so bbas@sophystoybox.local. What we need to do is configure all of our email accounts to use our new domain name that we have, sophystoybox.com, as well as any other domain name you might want to configure as well. Okay, let's go do that. So we're going to connect over to Exchange One. Okay, we're going to close Active Directory. We don't need that right now, and we're going to open up System Manager. Now within System Manager, we need to go into the Recipients folder, and then within the Recipients folder, you see a folder called Recipients Policy. Now there's a couple things we can do here. We have a default policy that we can definitely modify, or if you'd like, you can create a new recipient policy. Now when we're doing basic edits like we're going to be doing now, and they're going to affect the entire organization, then it's really not worth creating a new recipient policy. Okay, new recipient policies, these can be used if you want to set up some sort of policy that maybe only applies to a fraction of the users, maybe only the people in the sales organizational unit, something along those lines. When we want to affect everybody, we're going to be working with the default recipient policy that you see here. Okay, let's go to Properties, And then here we go to email addresses. Okay, and you see that by default we have 2 email addresses that are set up, and what these generation rules are basically is every time a new user account is mailbox enabled, they're going to be set up with these email addresses. So it's essentially alias at sophystoybox.local, and then here's the x.400 email address, that we really don't care about for this video right now, but you should be aware of the fact that this is also automatically generated using this recipient policy. Now, we have a couple of choices here when we want to add this sophystoybox.com recipient policy. We can just add this flat out as a new recipient policy, or we can edit our current one that you see up above. Okay, either way is going to work. It doesn't really matter which way we do it. Let's go ahead and edit this one. So we're going to select it as you see right here. Then we click Edit. Okay, and then all that we really need to do is change this address to what it's supposed to be for our new internet domain name, sophystoybox.com. So then we click OK. And make sure this is selected, and you see now that any new mailbox that's created is going to be set up, and it's going to be set up with alias at sophystoybox.com. Okay, notice I said any new mailbox. Now we got a problem here because we have roughly 20 mailboxes that are sophystoybox.local right now. What are we going to do about these guys? Well, luckily it's fairly easy. We click OK here, and we see that the email address of type SMTP has been modified. Do you want to update all corresponding recipient email addresses to match these new addresses? Okay, yeah, we do. Okay, and this is going to take care of that problem for us, and this is going to affect every single user within the Active Directory domain, okay, except for a couple exceptions. So let's talk about what those exceptions might be. I'm going to go ahead and click yes, let that kind of work its magic. The first exception would be what I talked about before, and that's if you set this recipient policy up only to affect a certain group of users, certain organizational unit of users, well then in that case, of course, it would only affect those users. The other alternative, other exception I should say, is if for some reason you went into a particular user or group, like you see right here, and you checked a box. Let's just go to the box first and we'll talk about it. This is off of the email addresses tab. Down here where it says automatically update email addresses based on recipient policy. Okay, well what you can do, if you set up an email address and you really don't want it to change no matter what the recipient policy is, or if you don't want any new email addresses generated for it, you can deselect this box, okay, and then click OK. And then by doing so, every time you add a new email address to the recipient policy or any new recipient policy, this particular user or group will not be affected. Okay, well that's not what we want to do at this point right now. Let's go ahead and leave this as is. I will give you a couple examples once we've taken a look at how this new recipient policy works. Okay, I'm going to refresh this and let's see if we have any of these names updated yet. Doesn't look like it. So let's try this one more time. I'm going to come up here, refresh again, and I'm going to go into the actual user account itself just to see if we have any of these email addresses up to date yet. This can take a little bit of time, but typically it doesn't take all that much time. 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. One thing that you probably do want to do if you want to force this process along, this recipient update service, this by default just ran automatically, but if you've got it set up where it doesn't run automatically, or if it runs every 2 or 3 hours or every day, you can come here to these recipient update services and force the recipient update process. Now we have a couple different ones that we see here. This enterprise is going to force all the recipient update service changes throughout the enterprise, and then this is a domain version. Okay, well in this particular case we only have one domain and one enterprise, so it's not a big deal here. We'll just go ahead and click update now on both of these, and now the recipient update service should be working. Okay, if there's nothing new to update, it's not going to update anything new, but that's, in essence how that works. Okay, let's go take a look and see if we have anything updated here now within Active Directory. Okay, still looks like we're looking at .locals there. I'm going to go ahead and expand this out, see if we have any sophystoybox.coms anywhere else. Nope, still looking at .local here. Okay, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to pause this video momentarily, give this a couple minutes to actually take effect before we continue on, and then once that has taken effect, I'll start it back up again and just give you a rough idea of the amount of time it took in this particular case. Okay, it didn't take too much longer, 4 or 5 minutes or so, and we have these all updated now. Okay, and my system seems to be acting a little bit slower too. I do have the Exchange server and domain controller on the same computer, which seems like it's been causing a few problems. Okay, let's go take a look now at what this does though. You can see right away if we look into the Manager's OU, the default email address has now been changed to bbass@sophystoybox.com, and likewise for all of our different users. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up one of these, and we'll go over to the email address tabs. Okay, and here you see that we now have two SMTP addresses. We have the new one, bbass@sophystoybox.com, and we still have our old email addresses as well. Okay, so the benefit of this is any email that's addressed to bbass@sophystoybox.local is still going to be addressed to this particular user. Okay, now remember we edited the recipient policy. We didn't add a new one. So what that means for us, any new user that's added is going to get just the sophystoybox.com, which is, fine too. If you wanted to, you could delete this address. It's not a big deal either way. I'd be more concerned about it if it was an internet address like this and some of your customers or acquaintances had your old domain name, your old email address format. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now we can do this with multiple domains. If you, for example, have different companies set up, different divisions, okay, maybe you've got Sophie's Jack in the Boxes or something like that, whatever your domain name might be, you can set up multiple email addresses for each of your user accounts or for the entire Exchange organization. Okay, and one example that we had talked of previously, let's go ahead and talk about this now, was just setting up a new recipient policy for the domain name that we registered, sophystoybox.net. So I'm just going to go back into this default policy again here, go into properties, and show you how you can do this. It's just new SMTP address, and we're going to put in here at sophystoybox.net. Okay, make sure you put the ampersand in there. Okay, and then this checkbox is basically going to let you know that this particular Exchange server is responsible for mail delivery to this address. Okay, and you want to make sure you check that. Okay, so I click OK. The next thing you need to do is check this box if you want all of your users to receive the at sophystoybox.net suffix. Okay, and we do, so I'm going to go ahead and check it, click OK, and we get that same message as before. Do you want us to update all corresponding recipient email addresses to match these addresses? So clicking yes will start that process, and once again should take 5 or 10 minutes or so, just depending upon your connection speed. Now going back over to XP base system here, let's take a look at one of our final notes. Okay, and this is on recipient policy variables. Okay, and these are kind of cool because you can use these variables and you can create custom names based upon these variables. Okay, for example, you may want to have email addresses for all of your users based upon their first name and last name. So you might have bob.bass@sophystoybox.com. Okay, you can do that using these variables. Okay, so for example, we're going to use this %G and %S. Okay, G for given name, S for surname. So I'm just going to go right back over to Exchange 1. We'll go back inside this recipient policy once again and create a new recipient policy. Okay, so it's for SMTP address. And now what I need to do is put in %G dot %S. Okay, so first name dot last name at sophystoybox.com. So this should come up with, like we just described a second ago, bob.bass@sophystoybox.com. So I click OK here again. I'm going to select this and then click OK and yes to finalize. Okay, now it's just a matter of time. We can go over here, see if any of these have gone through yet. We're just going to come to Action and refresh. Okay, so I refreshed that. Let's go take a look at our Manager's OU, Bob Bass. Okay, and you see that we do have sophistoybox.net set up. Okay, so that one already went through. Okay, if we wait just a little bit longer, probably have to close this and reopen it, I would imagine. We can refresh this again. Okay, and by this time we may have the second one that we just added a second ago. Okay, and there we do. bob.bass@sophistoybox.com. So any of these email addresses will all deliver email to the same Bob Bass Exchange mailbox. Okay, so a way to set up, you don't necessarily need this many email addresses for somebody, but just to give you a feel how you can customize this. Now, one more thing to point out here, as long as we're looking at it, notice that this one's bold and these other three are not bold. That's because this particular address is the primary address. The significance of the primary address is this is going to be the reply address that's always used. So no matter, if Bob Bass sends an email and you reply to him, you're going to be replying to bbass@sophistoybox.com. If that's not what you want, if you have a new standard where this is supposed to be the actual email address that people use, we'll click Set as Primary on that one, and now this is going to be your primary email address, bob.bass@sophistoybox.com. Okay, so you can set that any way you want. That's up to you. I'm going to put this back to how it was, just so we have consistency here before we close this out. Okay, let's go back over then to the desktop. And we've got one more thing to look at, and that is our port forwarding setup on the Linksys router. And then after that, or actually before that, let's test some email. What we're going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, and that email that was sent before did make it through, so I'm going to send some emails back in here and see if we can actually access email back and forth. Because at this point right now, we have all the prerequisites in place. We have our internet gateway set up. We set up the internet gateway, in this case our NAT server, with port forwarding, so it's forwarding emails into our Exchange server. We have a live domain name, sophistoybox.com. We have MX records set up, so anybody who's sending email to sophistoybox.com has their email directed to our public IP address on our NAT server. And then we have recipient policy set up, and that's basically telling your Exchange server, hey, here's who you're responsible for. Any email that comes in that's addressed to this domain name, you try to deliver. Okay, so we have all those things set up at this point right now. Okay, like I said, let me pause this video right now. I'm going to send a couple emails inbound to some email addresses, and we'll see, just double check and make sure we have everything working correctly. Okay, those emails have been sent, and this will be a good test. I have not checked these at all, so let's see if we went through and we configured everything correctly first time through. So, okay, we're going to go over to XP1, and currently Ray Moray is logged on here from before. Okay, so we're going to open up Outlook here, and we're expecting, I sent 2 different emails to Ray's new email addresses. Okay, and it looks like, I'm surprised 3 came in actually. So let's talk about this. First one that was sent out to the R Moray email address. Okay, and you can look and see that right here. Okay, it was sent to R Moray at Sophie's Toy Box. Actually, it wasn't sent to this. This is his original email address. It's still in there. But this one was actually the email address that was addressed to was rmoray@sophistoybox.com. This one was addressed to ray.moray@sophistoybox.com. And this one actually was addressed to the sales team. Okay, what's happened here is we addressed it out to sales@sophistoybox.com, and because Ray is a member of that sales team, he actually got one of the emails as well. So this is one thing that we were talking about configuring before. We'll have to take a look at this and configure this right now, okay? Because, we don't want this to be sent out to a distribution list as it is currently. Okay, why don't we go look at that actually? Let's go take a look at that first before we go on to the port forwarding on the Linksys router, which will be a fairly simple setup. So we're going to connect back over to Exchange 1, and just to refresh you what the problem is here, remember we originally had set up a sales group, and we mail enabled this sales group. And what our thought process was, well, we're going to have any internal email. This is kind of a distribution list. So if you want to contact Frank, Ray, Steve, and Sue, well, you just send an email out to sales@sophistoybox.com. Well, the problem is here, we have external users as well who'd like to contact the organization, Sophie's Toy Box, by using the email address sales@sophistoybox.com. Okay, so what's going to happen is somebody will send an email to sales@sophystoybox.com with a question about our products, and then it's going to be sent out to each of these different users, causing confusion. So what's going to happen now? Each one of these 4 users is going to respond back to the person, okay, and then multiply this by 20, 30, 40, 50 different users. You can see that this could cause a problem. What we want to do instead is make this an internal distribution list. So people within Sophie's Toy Box, if they're trying to send something out to all the salespeople, for example, if Bob Bass, one of the sales managers, wants to contact all 4 salespeople, well, he's going to want to send this on to his internal distribution list. Our external users, the people, our customers, clients, we don't want them to be using this. So what we're going to do is a 2-step process. Number 1, we're going to change this email address so we can use this for our actual sales mailbox. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, go to properties, and I'm going to come up here to email addresses. And what I want to do here is just set this up so my internal email address is, oops, got to click edit first. Let's just call it internal sales list at sophystoybox.com. Okay, so this, no mistaking about it, it's internal sales list at sophystoybox.com. Nobody out in the internet is going to send a request to a salesperson using that long email address. So I'm going to click OK. I really don't need these other email addresses, so I'm going to lose these here. This one I'm going to leave for right now, though. I'm going to go ahead and remove this. I'm going to click yes. And this one, the only reason I mentioned leaving it for right now, well, the sales alias, which is associated with this particular group, right now is mapping to sales@sophystoybox.local, okay, this old email address. So I guess we can safely remove it, but what will happen if you were to send an email out right now to sales, it's going to use this old email address and it's going to bounce back. Okay, after a couple minutes, 5 or 10 minutes or so, the global address list will update and it'll be okay. So let's go ahead and remove this just so we have this nice and clean. Okay, so now we just have this one email address associated with our sales group, and I'm also going to deselect this box here because the next time the recipient policy runs, I don't want new email addresses generated for this group. This is the only email address that I want associated with my internal sales group. Okay, so I can click OK here, and then now I'm going to go to my sales box. And we set this up in the last video. The purpose of this was basically to be a sales common mailbox. So when customers out on the internet send an email to sales@sophystoybox.com, that email is going to come inside the company and it's going to sit in this common mailbox where any of the 4 salespeople can access it. So what we need to do first is change the email address here. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this so you can see now that this is internal sales list. I'm going to go down here to properties. Okay, and I'm going to go to the email addresses tab. Okay, so what we need right here, first off, we need to decide what we're going to use, and of course, as we already talked about, we want to use just plain old sales@sophystoybox.com. So we'll set this first, and this is our primary address. Then we need to decide whether or not we want to use these other addresses as well. This is not necessary, so we're going to remove this. Okay, salesbox@sophystoybox.local I don't think is necessary either. Okay, and then the only choice we'd have, do we want to set up sales@sophystoybox.net? I'll say yes right now because if we're using this domain name, some people will expect us to have a sales email address. So I'm going to go ahead and configure this as well. So now what this means, any email that's addressed to either sales@sophystoybox.com or .net is going to end up in this sales mailbox. Okay, so we can now click, actually I want to select this, so we're no longer going to have new email addresses associated with this mailbox, and now I'm going to click OK. Okay, so now any email from the outside is actually going to come inbound, and it's no longer, let's refresh this. Okay. It's no longer going to be directed to all the people. It's going to go to one common mailbox, and then those people can access that email basically when they get a chance to access it. So let's test this out. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here and show you what I'm talking about. Okay, I sent that email. Now what I'm going to do is connect back over to XP1 where I'm logged on as Ray Moray. Okay, and what we'll do here, let's see if this has been set up yet. Hopefully it's been updated with an Exchange and it'll be directed to the right location. Okay, so Ray Moray has this mailbox for himself. Okay, and before, remember, he received that email when it was directed to sales@sophystoybox.com. He was one of the 4 salespeople who received it off the distribution list. He also has set up, we did this in a earlier exercise, we set up this sales mailbox. And you can see right here, this is the sales mailbox. This is going to be a common mailbox, and he's accessed this because he's been given permissions to it. And if you look right here, okay, Ray actually has the ability to answer this question that was sent by myself from a different email address. Okay, so kind of a cool thing. He doesn't have to answer it. It could be answered by one of the other 3 salespeople as well. If he chooses to, he just has to basically double click it, and now he's going to reply directly to it. Okay, now what he wants to do is, right here it automatically fills in the from for him, and it's important that he does that. So when the external people see this, they're going to send a reply back to the general sales email address. And if you look right here, if we double click this, you'll see that the email address is sales@sophystoybox.com. Okay, so that's all that we have here. We won't send that reply out. Okay, what we're going to do now is set up port forwarding on the Linksys router. And during downtime, what I did is unhook the NAT server and basically plug the cables back into the Linksys router. So if you are going to look at our network diagram here, basically this device here is now the Linksys router instead of this NAT server. Everything is the same. The local IP address is configured as you see up here, and then our public IP address is configured as you see right here. Okay, so very straightforward. Now to connect to it, we're just going to go out to the management interface, and we can reach this IP address at 192.168.200.254. Okay, and we got to log on here. Okay, and this is then going to give us access to the Linksys router, and there's several different things we can manage. We're only going to focus in on the one thing we were mentioning before, and that's the port forwarding. Now on this Linksys router, it's under Applications and Gaming. If we click here, we see that this is kind of under Port Range Forwarding, and then down below, here's the actual setting. It's already been put into place. So to do this, I'm just going to go ahead and simulate this for you. You're putting in the application, and this can be anything you want. This is just for your own identification purposes. Port number, start to end, so this would be a range of ports. If it's only one port, you're just going to specify port 25 like you see there. The protocol, if you leave it both, it's then going to allow TCP and UDP. The both setting would work. However, you do want to specify just TCP. That's the protocol that SMTP is going to work over, and it's going to be more secure than allowing 2 holes into your network rather than just one. Okay, so you would select TCP, and then this is the IP address of the Exchange server that we're forwarding to. So you would enter in the IP address as you see above, and then click Enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this setting, because we're not going to save this one. And then all that you have to do after that is real simple. Is just go down to the bottom here, click Save Settings, and then you're all set. Okay, and at this point right now, this should work just like the NAT server did when we set up that forwarding. I should be able to send an email inbound. It's going to go through the Linksys router and be directed to Exchange 1. So let's test this out just to make sure that everything is working as it should be. I'm going to go ahead and pause this video, send a quick email over to Ray Moray just to test and make sure that everything's working appropriately. Okay, I sent that email off, so these emails have been coming across pretty quickly, so it may already be here. It's only been about 30 seconds or so, so I'm going to come back over here, and then we look in Ray Moray's inbox. Nothing yet. I'm going to click Send Receive, though, see if my Exchange server's picked it up. And it has. You can see right here, we've named this Linksys router test just to let you know that this is the email that was sent after we configured the Linksys router. Okay, one more thing you need to know before we wrap up this video. Over at GoDaddy before, when we logged on there and we changed our DNS and MX records, one thing we didn't show you was the fact that by default, GoDaddy has an SMTP record configured in this CNAME section. Okay, this record will conflict with your host record that you create if you indeed use the same SMTP name here. okay, because you've got two records both named SMTP. So what we did, and basically didn't tell you before because it was done offline, we deleted this SMTP record that was within the CNAMES area. So, if this said SMTP, basically you just came over here and you click delete. Okay, and it's real important that you do that. Otherwise, these records up here will not resolve. And when you try to go to, your MX records aren't going to come through, OWA mail, any of these other records that you've created will not work. Okay? So just make sure you delete your SMTP record, or if you're using a different name, make sure that there's not a duplicate name anywhere else, either in the CNAMES or down here in your MX records. Okay, that wraps up video 4 on setting up an Internet Gateway in Exchange 2003. We'll see you back here real soon when we go into video 5, setting up an SMTP relay server to work in conjunction with Exchange 2003.